The glass hit the marble floor of the St. Regis Miami's rooftop restaurant at exactly 9:47 p.m., and the entire 53rd floor stopped breathing. Not because of the sound. Glass broke in expensive restaurants all the time. Busboys knocked things over. Tourists got clumsy with champagne flutes. The staff at Aurelius was trained to treat those moments like they had never happened. No. The room went silent because of who had thrown it. Zane Caruso, 26 years old, sole heir to the Caruso Group, $3 billion in real estate, shipping contracts, and things that didn't appear on any balance sheet, had just hurled a crystal highball glass at the head of his personal sommelier. The man had ducked in time. The glass had not. It exploded against the column behind him, sending shards of baccarat across the white linen tablecloth of table 1. The sommelier stood perfectly still, his face a mask of professional terror. The other diners, senators, hedge fund managers, 2 South American industrialists, and a former pop star who now laundered money through a wellness brand, did not move. The floor manager, a sweating man named Gerald, pressed himself against the host stand and looked desperately toward the kitchen. And June Calloway, 28 years old, carrying a tray of amuse-bouches she had just run from the cold station, walked directly into the middle of it. She assessed the scene in exactly 3 seconds. Broken glass, shaking sommelier, a man in a black shirt open at the collar radiating the specific energy of someone who had been drinking since noon and had run out of patience somewhere around 6. She looked at the tray in her hands. She looked at the man. She set the tray down on the nearest service station. She picked up a linen napkin. She walked to table 1. "Sir." Her voice was even. "You've got a cut on your hand." Zane Caruso looked up. His eyes were dark, unfocused at the edges, and deeply unaccustomed to being interrupted. "What? Your right hand. When you threw it, there's a cut on your palm." He looked down. There was, in fact, a thin red line across the base of his thumb, where the rim had caught him on release. He hadn't noticed. He stared at it like it was an imposition. "Let me see it." June reached forward and took his hand before he could object. The room held its breath again, for a completely different reason. She pressed the linen to the cut. It was shallow, dramatic-looking, but nothing serious. She applied pressure and looked at him directly. "You're going to want to keep pressure on that. The baccarat crystal has a higher silica content. If there's a fragment in there, you won't feel it tonight, but you will feel it tomorrow." She released his hand, set the napkin in his grip, and turned to the sommelier. "Marcus, bring a fresh towel from the prep station. And bring Mr. Caruso the Macallan 18, not the 25. The 25 is what he's been drinking, and if he wanted to feel better, it would have worked by now." She turned back to the table, collected the menu that had gotten splattered, replaced it with a clean one from the host stand, and then looked at Zane Caruso one more time. "Can I bring you anything to eat? You look like someone who skipped dinner." Zane Caruso stared at her. The room waited for the detonation. Instead, Zane leaned back in his chair. The tension in his shoulders, that coiled, wire-tight thing that had been building all evening, shifted, not gone, but shifted. "Steak," he said. "Whatever's not on the menu, I'll see what chef can do." June picked up her amuse-bouche tray and walked back to the kitchen. Gerald appeared at her elbow before she hit the swinging doors. "Are you out of your mind? Do you know who that is?" "Yes." June pushed the door open with her shoulder. "He's the guy to just tip the tension out of this whole room without anyone getting hurt." "You're welcome." She didn't look back, but she heard Gerald's strangled exhale behind her, and she felt, with some precision, that her job was probably over before morning. She was wrong about the timing. The consequences came at 2 in the afternoon the following day. June lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Wynwood that smelled of turpentine from the art studios downstairs, and the saffron rice her neighbor, Mrs. Albanese, cooked every Sunday. She was sitting at her kitchen table, going through a stack of medical invoices when the knock came. 3 of them, measured and deliberate, like someone who had all the time in the world and knew it. She closed the folder on the invoices. Her mother's name printed at the top, the number at the bottom making her jaw ache, and went to the door. Through the peephole, a man she didn't recognize, tall, silver at his temples, wearing a suit that cost more than her car. Behind him, slightly out of frame, the edge of a second person. She left the chain on. "Can I help you, M. Calloway?" The voice was gravelled and unhurried. "My name is Aldrich Caruso. I'd like to speak with you." The father. June knew the name. Everyone in Miami who worked in hospitality knew the name. Aldrich Caruso had built the Caruso Group from a single waterfront parcel in 1991 into something that touched the city's bones, the ports, the permits, the politicians. He was not technically a criminal. He was something more precise than that. He was the reason certain things happened and certain things didn't, and neither category ever made the news. She undid the chain. Aldrich Caruso was in his early 60s, and looked like a building that had been deliberately designed to outlast everything around it. He moved into her apartment with the mild curiosity of a man assessing property. His eyes traveled across the medical invoices on the table, the bare wall where a print used to hang before she sold it, the single pot soaking in the kitchen sink. The second man, younger, built like a door, stayed in the hallway. "You're going to tell me I'm fired," June said. Aldrich turned. On the contrary, he reached into his breast pocket and placed a cream-colored envelope on her kitchen table, directly on top of the medical invoices. "I'm going to offer you a job." June looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. "Doing what?" "Son is ungovernable," Aldrich said without apparent emotion, as though reporting a structural flaw in a building he owned. "He has destroyed the professional relationship of 11 personal coordinators in the past 8 months. He fires them, or they quit, or in 2 cases they simply stopped answering their phones. He does not respond to authority. He does not respond to money, which he has in excess. He does not respond to consequence, because he has never experienced one he could not buy his way out of." Aldrich folded his hands over the top of his cane. He didn't use the cane for balance, June noticed. He held it the way a man holds something he's accustomed to using as a tool. "Last night, he responded to you. I told him he had a cut on his hand. You told him what to drink, reorganized his table, and redirected his attention without flinching. My security team counted 4 seconds from the moment you assessed the situation to the moment the room de-escalated." He nodded toward the envelope. "The contract details a salary of $9,000 a week. The apartment in the building on Brickell Quay is included. There is also a provision regarding your mother's outstanding medical debt, approximately $62,000 at last count. That would be cleared as a signing bonus." June's hand moved slightly, involuntarily, toward the envelope. She pulled it back. "Why me?" she asked. "I work a floor. I've never coordinated anyone's calendar. I don't know the first thing about his business. You know how to stand in front of a man who is about to do damage and make him pause," Aldrich said. "That is the only skill my son currently lacks, and the only one I cannot hire from an agency." June thought about the folder under the envelope. She thought about her mother, waiting on a surgical consult that kept getting pushed back. She thought about the way the number on the invoice had stopped shocking her and started simply existing, like a stone on her chest she'd gotten used to carrying. "If he puts his hands on me," she said, "if he becomes threatening toward me personally, I walk, and I keep the first month." Aldrich studied her for a moment. "If he puts his hands on you," he said carefully, "you have my full authorization to do whatever you did with that napkin, but with something heavier." He picked up his cane. He moved toward the door. "One more thing," June said. "His cut. Did he get it looked at?" Aldrich paused. Something crossed his face, too fast to name. "He did not. Then make sure there's antiseptic at the penthouse. If he's the kind of man who doesn't notice he's bleeding, he's the kind of man who'll ignore it until it gets infected." Aldrich turned to look at her once more. He nodded, just barely. "Monday morning, 8 a.m., he said. Don't be late. He hates waiting." "So do I," June said. The elevator to the Caruso penthouse required a private keycard and ascended 42 floors in the time it took June to give herself a single pep talk and abandon it halfway through. She was wearing a charcoal blazer she had pressed 3 times that morning. She was carrying a legal pad and a phone that was 3 models out of date. She looked, she knew, exactly like what she was, a floor server from a restaurant who had been handed a key to a kingdom and had no idea what door it opened. The elevator dinged. The penthouse was light and glass and money arranged with the cold precision of someone who had hired a designer and then ignored everything they suggested. The furniture was expensive and unused. The kitchen was immaculate in the way kitchens are when no one has ever cooked in them. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Miami spread in every direction, flat and brilliant and slightly unreal, like a city that had been designed specifically to be viewed from this altitude. Zane Caruso was on the terrace. He was on the phone, shirtless, leaning on the railing with his back to her. The cut on his hand, she noticed when she stepped through the glass doors, had not been cleaned properly. The edges were slightly raised. He turned, looked at her. Recognition moved across his face slowly, like a cloud shadow. "The sommelier's backup plan," he said and hung up the phone. "Executive coordinator," June said. "June Calloway, your father has the paperwork." Zane looked at the legal pad under her arm. "You brought a notepad." "I brought the notepad because your schedule for this week is apparently 4 disconnected items that don't account for travel time, 2 of which conflict, and 1 of which is a meeting with the Port Authority that you missed last Thursday and rescheduled to the same time as your attorney." Zane tilted his head. "How do you know my schedule? Your father's assistant emailed it to me at 11 last night. It took me about 4 minutes to see the problems." She clicked her pen. "The Port Authority meeting needs to move to Tuesday at 10. Your attorney can take Wednesday afternoon. And you need to eat before the lender's presentation on Thursday, or you will say something you can't walk back." Zane stared at her. He wasn't angry yet. He was something June had learned to read in restaurant work as more dangerous than anger. Genuinely surprised. "You've been hired for a day and you're telling me what to eat. I'm telling you what the schedule needs. What you eat is your business. I'm just noting that the last time you skipped dinner, it cost the restaurant 2 baccarat glasses and a sommelier's dry cleaning." Silence. Zane's jaw worked. He looked out at the skyline. Then he looked back at her. "The hand," he said. "You were right. It itched this morning." June reached into her jacket pocket and produced a small tube of antiseptic and a bandage strip. She held it out. Zane looked at the tube. He looked at her. He took it. "You're going to be a problem," he said. "Probably," June agreed. "Do you want coffee before the 9:30 call?" She heard him exhale as she walked back inside to find the espresso machine. The first week was a battlefield with no front line. Zane changed meetings without notice. He cancelled drivers and took his own car at speeds that made June's fingernails leave marks in the passenger door handle. He would disappear for 2 hours, no explanation, then reappear expecting her to have smoothed over whatever appointment she'd had no knowledge of. He used silence as a weapon. He used his size, filling a doorframe moving too close when he spoke, as a test. June matched every move. She kept a notebook on his patterns. She learned that he was actually awake at 6 regardless of what the night before had been, that he read every contract twice and caught errors that his own legal team missed, that he tipped cleaning staff with what looked like embarrassing extravagance but was actually calculated, that the recklessness was a performance, and the engine underneath was something precise and cold and entirely capable. She learned that the rage was real, but it had an origin she hadn't found yet. It was the second Thursday that things changed. They were leaving the parking structure of a glass tower in Doral after a meeting with a construction consortium that had gone 40 minutes too long. It was nearly 9. June was reviewing notes from her phone when she noticed the driver, a new man named Torelli, was sitting in the drop-off lane with the car running. His hands were on the wheel. He hadn't moved to open the door. He was staring straight ahead with the particular rigidity of someone who is trying very hard to look natural. "Hold on," she said, and put her hand out to stop Zane without thinking. He looked at her, hand on his chest, then at her face. "Torelli," June said, keeping her voice level. "He's been in the lane for 11 minutes. The engine's been running. It's 72 degrees tonight." Zane didn't ask how she knew the car had been there 11 minutes. His eyes moved to the vehicle. His entire affect changed, the way a light changes when you flip a switch. Same person, completely different voltage. "Go back inside," he said. "Service entrance. Now, Zane. Go." He stepped in front of her, and she caught the glint of metal at his side that she had suspected was there and had chosen not to examine. She went back inside. She found the security desk. She told the guard there was a situation in the drop-off lane and to call the police, calmly, before going back to the glass doors to watch. What happened next was fast and surgical. 2 men she hadn't seen before materialized from a parked van. Zane moved toward the car rather than away from it, drawing the attack into the open lane, away from the entrance, away from the lobby. He was controlled in a way that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with practiced efficiency. But she saw the third man. He had come around the far side of the van, positioning himself at Zane's blind left, while Zane's attention was on the 2 in front. June pushed through the glass door. She grabbed the decorative steel planter at the entrance, heavy, bolted to a base ring but not to the ground, and yanked. It came loose with a wrench that burned her palms. She hurled it not at the third man, but at the metal support pillar 4 feet to his left. The crash was enormous, echoing off the concrete and glass. Every head turned, including the third man's. 1 second, that was all. Zane turned on instinct. He clocked the third man's position, adjusted, moved. 2 shots, flat and precise. The van reversed hard out of the lane and was gone before the police sirens hit the edge of the parking structure. Silence. June was standing in the entrance with bleeding palms and a security guard beside her who was too stunned to speak. Zane walked back to her through the empty lane. His face was very still. "You missed," he said. "I hit what I was aiming at," she said. Her voice was shaking slightly at the edges and she couldn't stop it. He took her hands and turned them over in his, looking at the abrasions from the planter rim. He didn't let go right away. "I had it," he said. "You had 2 of them," she said. "The third one was outside your sight line." He looked at her for a long moment in the harsh light of the parking structure. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, not warmth exactly, but the absence of the performance. She was seeing him without the performance for the first time. "Can you drive?" he asked. "Yes." "Yes, then you're driving." He handed her the keys to a second car, the backup, kept 3 levels down. And you're not taking the highway. They drove to a safe house he had in Coconut Grove, a bungalow behind a wall of travelers' palms that looked like no one lived there and had every indication that it was regularly, quietly maintained. He locked the doors and turned on 3 lamps and sat down heavily on the couch. June found a first aid kit under the kitchen sink. She cleaned her own hands first, then came to him, and without a word he held out his forearm, where a graze she hadn't noticed was now bleeding through his sleeve. "You should have said something. You were driving. You were bleeding. I've bled before." He watched her work. His voice had lost its edge. What was left was quieter and somehow more unsettling because it sounded like the actual man. "You could have run. Back there. You went back inside. I thought you were gone. I went inside to tell security to call the police, and then you came back out. You had a blind spot, June." Her name in his mouth, flat, and waited. "Why did you come back out?" She pressed a gauze pad to the graze and held it there. She looked at him steadily. "My mother is in a hospital in Fort Lauderdale because no one in her life paid attention when things were going wrong," she said. "I don't have it in me to be a person who sees something going wrong and goes back inside." Zane was quiet for a long time. "She's sick? She will be fine. Eventually, if the bills get paid." June taped the bandage with more precision than the situation required because her hands needed something to do. "That's why I took this job, not because of my sparkling personality." She looked up. "You have moments." Something at the edge of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but a shift. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. The shift was gone. "We have to go," he said, standing. Someone got the route. Someone who had access to the schedule. June went still. "Only 3 people had the schedule tonight, you, me, and Drago," Zane said. His voice was granite. Renato Drago was the Caruso Group's head of operations. June had met him twice. Both times she'd felt the specific discomfort of talking to someone whose pleasantness was a coat worn over something entirely different. He smiled too continuously. He agreed too smoothly. He held doors in a way that felt like surveillance. They drove to a warehouse in the Port District where 2 of Zane's men had already detained the driver, Torelli. Aldrich Caruso was there, sitting in a camp chair with his cane across his knees like a scepter. Drago stood beside him, in his expensive coat, his hands folded, his face arranged in appropriate concern. June walked in and immediately felt it. The way Torelli's eyes moved. Not to Zane, not to Aldrich, but straight to Drago, fast and desperate, the look of a man checking the face of the person who had told him what to do. Drago said. She was seen leaving the parking structure and re-entering 3 minutes before the attack. Interesting timing. Aldrich turned his measured gaze to June. "She called security," Zane said. "That's her account," Drago said. "But consider, she had access to the schedule. She knew the route. She is new, unvetted, and was conveniently positioned exactly where she needed to be to redirect your attention." "I redirected his attention from a 3rd gunman," June said. "A gunman who would have shot him from behind, or a performance that cleared the lane so the others could retreat cleanly once the job was done." The logic was tight. June saw Zane absorb it. She saw the muscle in his jaw contract, the calculus of evidence moving across his face. He was a man trained to trust pattern over instinct, and the pattern on paper looked bad for her. Zane looked at her. The absence of the performance was gone. The wall was back. "Drago," Zane said slowly. "What was the route?" "The standard Doral corridor, which I changed at 11 this morning." Zane's eyes didn't leave June's, but something behind them was shifting. "I changed it because the original had a construction closure. I only told 2 people, you and the driver." Drago's smoothness cracked, just slightly, at the seam. "I seed your coordinator," Drago said. "No," June said quietly. "You didn't. I have my email open on my phone right now. I changed the schedule at 11:12, based on a call from Zane directly. I never received a CC from anyone." Zane looked at Drago. The granite had become something colder. Drago moved. His hand went to his coat. He didn't get there. What happened in the following 4 minutes was not something June looked at directly. She kept her eyes on the back wall and listened to the efficient, terrible sounds of consequence arriving. And when it was over, Zane was standing in the center of the warehouse, and Drago was on the floor, and 2 of the men Zane trusted were already on their phones. Aldrich Caruso had not moved from his chair. He looked at June. "You identified his tell," the older man said. "His eyes." "He checked Torelli's face when he should have been looking at Zane," June said. "People look at who they're worried about." Aldrich studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, the way a man nods when something has been confirmed. 2 weeks later, June was sitting in the sunroom of Zane's penthouse with her ankle wrapped. A twist from the parking structure she'd been ignoring, and her laptop open, going through contracts she had no business understanding and was beginning to understand anyway. Zane was across from her on a call, speaking in the low, contained register he used when the conversation was about something serious. Outside, Miami was orange and gold with late afternoon light. When he hung up, he sat with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. Drago had been running a side channel to a competing syndicate for 14 months, he said. He was feeding them port access intel. The hit was supposed to look like a rival retaliation. The Caruso group destabilized. My father retires under pressure. Drago takes control with their backing, June said. He was patient, I'll give him that. Zane looked up at her. I threw you out of that building before I had the facts. June looked at her laptop screen. You did. Whereman, you were working with what someone had arranged for you to see. That's not an excuse. She looked up. He was watching her steadily, and she understood that this was not a man who found this easy or frequent. No, she agreed, it's not. But I'm still here. Why? June thought about it genuinely, the way she would think about something that had no easy answer. Because I don't think you're what you perform, she said. I think the man who reads every contract twice and tips the cleaning staff and noticed I was carrying a first aid kit before he asked me a single question about it. I think that's the actual one. The other version is a deterrent. Zane was quiet for a moment. What's in the first aid kit? Antiseptic, bandages, and a small pair of scissors. You've been carrying that since day one. You didn't clean your cut the night before you hired me. I figured someone had to. He laughed. It was short and genuine and entirely unpracticed, the kind of laugh that happens before a person remembers they have a reputation to maintain. He recovered fast, but not fast enough. The ankle, he said. You should have it x-rayed. It's a sprain. You don't know that. I've sprained both ankles enough times to know what a sprain feels like. He stood and crossed the room and sat on the table across from her and held out his hand. She gave him her foot, and he unwrapped the bandage with a focused, careful attention she recognized from the first night. From the way he'd looked at the cut on his own palm, like it was a problem he intended to understand completely before addressing. My mother, he said, not looking up from her ankle, died when I was 17. No warning. She was at a fundraiser dinner, standing and talking, and then she was not. He pressed 2 fingers gently against the swelling. The last thing I said to her was that the event was pointless and I didn't want to be there. June was quiet. I've been trying to burn through everything slow ever since, he said. All of it. The money, the rooms, the people. As if I just move fast enough, it won't catch up. It always catches up, June said. I know that now. You're not afraid of me. I was afraid of you the first night. I just had a tray in my hands and a reflex for de-escalation. And now? She held his Gershon real. He was still holding her foot. The afternoon light was doing something particular to the room, filling it with a quality of warmth that felt separate from the city outside. She was aware of the silence in the way you're aware of it when it becomes a different kind of thing. His phone didn't ring. No one knocked. The moment didn't shatter. He leaned in slightly. She let him. And then he stopped, a half an inch away, and looked at her with the question in his eyes rather than his mouth. Ask, she said. Are you staying? He asked. After the ankle heals and the account is squared and your mother is taken care of. Are you staying? June looked at him for a long moment. At the scar on his palm that had healed crooked because he hadn't cleaned it properly and had probably picked at it. At the line between his brows that appeared when he was reading something that mattered. At the man who had laughed 3 minutes ago for the first time in what she suspected was a long time. I'm staying, she said. He kissed her then, carefully, the way he read contracts, twice, attending to everything. Her mother's surgery was scheduled 6 weeks later. June drove to Fort Lauderdale on a Tuesday morning, alone, because she had asked Zane not to come and he had respected it, which was itself a kind of miracle. Her mother, Diane Calloway, was sitting up in the hospital bed when June came in, smaller than June remembered, her hair gone grey at a speed that still startled her. Diane looked at her daughter, the blazer, the phone, the new watch that had not come from a department store, with an expression between recognition and reassessment. You look different, Diane said. I have a better job, June said, and sat down and took her mother's hand. The man, Diane said, because mothers always know. It's complicated. Is he good to you? June thought about the night in the parking structure, his hands turning hers over in the concrete light. She thought about the ankle, the careful attention. She thought about the contract he had sent to her mother's hospital billing department the morning after their conversation in the penthouse. No fanfare. No mention of it that arrived in June's inbox at 7:04 a.m. Yes, she said. He is. Diane squeezed her hand, then uncomplicated. 3 months after that, the rooftop restaurant at the St. Regis reopened following a renovation. The new glass tables were heavier. The VIP section had been quietly redesigned. Gerald, the floor manager, had been promoted to director of operations. June walked in wearing a dress the color of good cognac, her hand in Zane's. She recognized the young server who came to the table. A new hire, nervous, his uniform a little large, holding a leather-bound menu with the reverence of someone who hadn't yet learned that the guests at table 1 were just people, albeit people with considerably more consequences. He fumbled, slightly setting down the water glasses. June watched Zane watch him. Zane reached out and set the tipped glass back on its base, casually, without comment, without looking at the kid. The server exhaled. "Take your time," Zane said. June looked at him. He didn't look back, but the corner of his mouth moved. She thought about the night she had walked into the storm at table 1 with a tray and no plan, and the absolute refusal to clean up glass. She thought about the series of impossible things between that night and this one. The parking structure, the safe house, the warehouse, the ankle, the honest quiet of a man who had finally stopped running. She reached under the table and found his hand. He turned it over and laced his fingers through hers, without looking down the way people do when they've done it enough that it's become a kind of fluency. The server finally steadied himself. "Can I start you with sparkling water?" June looked at Zane. He looked at her and there was that almost smile, the real one she'd had to earn. "Sparkling," he said. "Tonight, absolutely sparkling." And underneath the hum of the city and the soft noise of the room, she thought, so this is what it looks like when something impossible becomes ordinary. Not a bang, not a before and after. Just two people at a table in Miami, finally somewhere neither of them has to perform. The waiter brought the water. Zane raised his glass. June raised hers. She didn't make a toast. Neither did he. They just drank, and the city glittered 43 floors below. And the night, for the first time in a long time for both of them, asked nothing at all.